Namaste. Today, we will discuss the two main pravaha or streams that influenced Kathak. And these are the mandir or the temple and the darbar or the royal courts. Dance performances usually take place wherever there are large gatherings. In ancient India, people usually congregated during religious festivals and especially during the temple festivals throughout the Indo-Gangetic Valley and especially in the areas which are now known as Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand and Bihar. There were many families of Kathak artists who lived and presented these dances in religious festivals. They usually presented the legends, and whenever there was a dramatic story, they performed it. This style of presentation was very much in vogue in ancient India, and the artists were belonging to hereditary groups, that is, the father teaching the son and so on. Although we know that this temple tradition has been there for centuries, very little is known about the names of the artists. The only records we have are from the Srinathji temple of Nathadwara and the Govindji temple of Jaipur in Rajasthan. And we are also told that when the king of Bikaner went on a visit to Gaya, he took Janki Prasad, who later started the Benares Gharana. And Janki Prasad accompanied him and performed in a number of temples in Benares, Prayag, Mathura, Vrindavan and Rewa. But otherwise, we have no definite records regarding the names of the artists or where they performed. But the style of performance has come down to us in the devotional stream that there is in Kathak. Shlokas to various deities were danced, and again, mythological stories were portrayed. Now, after the 11th century, a number of Islamic aggressors came to India and started plundering, and most of the temples were destroyed. Then gradually, Islamic kingdoms came up in India. During the 13th, 14th, 15th century, we have the Delhi Sultanate, followed by the great Mughals of the 16th and 17th centuries. Now, these rulers wanted to identify with their new land. And although they did have dance performers in their erstwhile land, and many of them had brought these dancers with them, but they started inviting the Indian dancers, who were called Natuas, to perform in their courts and also to teach the Muslim slave girls who had come from Central Asia. At this time, there was a give and take between these two classes of artists, those who had come from Central Asia and those who were indigenous Indians. And as a result of this, a new stream of music and dance came up called the Hindustani Classical stream. And in this, the earlier patterns were influenced by the new formations. In fact, Kathak has been influenced by the Central Asian dance styles, as can be seen from the upright stance, the importance given to footwork and to pirouettes or fast chakkars. Again, in earlier times, our dance was centered on religion, on mythological stories. The new rulers did not favor these stories, and so now dance became what is called secular. Presentations were evocative, and a lot of stress was given to abstract dance, into virtuosity, into fast rhythmic formations. Amongst the Delhi sultans, the greatest patron of the arts was Alauddin Khilji, who came towards the end of the 13th and the early 14th century. He promoted Hindustani music style. Then the great Mughals. Akbar himself was a great patron. He invited artists of all branches to his court. At that time, starting from the emperor's court to the households of rich people and ministers, dance performances were held. And in these dance performances could be seen an amalgamation of the Hindu and Islamic, the Indian and the Central Asian dance styles. Jahangir himself was also a great patron of the arts, and so too was Shah Jahan. After this, Muhammad Shah is well known for his patronage of the arts. But with the gradual decline of the Mughal Empire and the subsequent rise of the different princely states, it is the rulers of these states that started patronizing Kathak and thereby giving rise to different gharanas or styles of Kathak. Rajasthan has had a very long and illustrious history of Kathak dancers. In fact, the great Man Singh, who was a contemporary of Akbar, was a great patron of all forms of arts, including dance. He and his brother Madho Singh encouraged dancers, and so did Ram Singh. But the greatest patron amongst the rulers of Rajasthan was Maharaja Sawai Jai Singh II, who built up the city of Jaipur. He set up an institution called the Guni Janakhana, through which he patronized artists. And since that time, up to our Indian independence, this institution has looked after the dancers and the other artists of Rajasthan. After Jai Singh, Pratap Singh, then Maharaja Ram Singh II, Maharaja Sawai Madho Singh II, all of them were great patrons of the arts. In fact, there was a time when there was a very good relationship, a friendly relationship between the Mughals and the Rajput kings. And at that time, when the kings went to Delhi, they took their musicians and dancers with them. And many of them stayed back in Delhi, only to come back when Aurangzeb drove them away. Together with Jaipur, the history of Udaipur and Bikaner is also rich in the way that the kings used to patronize artists. In fact, in those days, amongst the great glories of being a king, one was that he was a great patron of the arts. Actually, the Rajasthan area has given rise to the Jaipur Gharana of Kathak. Another great gharana is the Lucknow Gharana. The Uttar Pradesh region is well known because a number of Kathak artists have been living there for generations. When Nawab Asaf-ud-Dawla became the Nawab of Oudh in 1775, Oudh was a very rich and affluent place, and great patronage was given to all forms of arts. At that time, Prakashji came from Allahabad and was accepted by Asaf-ud-Dawla as the Rajnartak or the court dancer. Since then, this family has been connected with the court of Lucknow until it was finally dismantled. Asaf-ud-Dawla encouraged dance, but the greatest patron was Wajid Ali Shah, who ruled from 1847 to 1856. He was a flamboyant man, at once a dancer, having learned from the great gurus Thakur Prasad ji and Durga Prasad ji. He also learned singing from the descendants of Mian Tansen. He was a wonderful dancer himself. He encouraged his begums to dance. In fact, he invited artists to teach the begums. He was the first to form Kathak dance dramas known as Rahas, where he himself used to be the hero. Then he did not confine these presentations to the court only. On special days, he would open the gates of his palace, and all the people of Lucknow used to come and see the king dance. And in this way, the love of Kathak and the other arts grew amongst the people of Awadh. Wajid Ali Shah encouraged many new presentations of Kathak, which had both Persian and Indian confluence. The Ahmad, the That, the Gatnikas were all due to his encouragement and his creation. And he was the first to bring in Thumri into Kathak. He gave great encouragement to the stalwarts of Kathak, Bindadin Maharaj and Kalsa Prasad. And it is because of Nawab Wajid Ali Shah that Kathak reached the epitome of excellence, the epitome of refinement. And not only that, Wajid Ali Shah recorded all the dance presentations of his court in the famous books called Bani and Najo, which are very valuable as documents regarding the history of Kathak. Now, I have been speaking about the rulers. Who were the artists? There were two types of artists. Those who belonged to the hereditary group, that is, the father teaching the son and so on. These artists were generally men. But again, there was a large group of baijis or female dancers who were actually descendants of the Central Asian slaves who had come with the rulers. They and their progeny also formed a large group of Kathak artists. And they performed in the courts. In the courts, dance was full of refinement, sensuality, evocative beauty. In fact, it was said that khubsurti, that is beauty, and nazakat, nuance, became the bywords. It is not only that these rulers that I have mentioned who encouraged Kathak dancers, princes of the other states of Punjab, with Patiala as its capital, then Gwalior, then Kashi, and even other smaller principalities, they all had Kathak dancers attached to their courts. And so this court milieu also gave an added dimension to Kathak. All along, up to the Indian independence, the rulers of the princely states encouraged Kathak. But foremost amongst them was Raja Chakradhar Singh of Raigad, who ruled from 1935 to 1947. Actually, the area Raigad, which belongs to eastern Chhattisgarh, the area that is known today, that area did not have any indigenous Kathak dancers living there. But Raja Chakradhar Singh's father was a great patron of the arts, and every time during the birthday of his son, he would invite artists to come and perform. Raja Chakradhar Singh was impressed by these artists and he patronized many of them and asked them to stay back in his palace and perform and teach. In fact, this was a time when the great stalwarts of the Jaipur and the Lucknow gharana were living in Raigad at the same time. On the one hand was Jailal ji, Sundar Prasad ji of Jaipur. Now on the other hand, Achan Maharaj, Lachu Maharaj, Shambhu Maharaj of the Lucknow gharana. Then also there was Sukhdev Maharaj of the Benares gharana. Now the Raja not only encouraged great well-known artists, he also encouraged folk artists and folk dancers. And from amongst these folk dancers, he chose 4 young boys: Kartik, Kalyan, Firtu, Barman. Kartik Ram, Kalyan Das Mahant, Firtu Ram Vaishnav and Barman Lal. These 4 were taught Kathak by the great Kathak gurus and artists under the patronage of the king. And the king himself patronized and overseed what they were learning. And so these 4 young boys blossomed into great artists and brought great name and fame for Raigad. And subsequently it is their influence that has made Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh such great centers of Kathak learning. The king was an adept Bakhawaj player and he also recorded all the dance items and all the rhythmic variations played on the tabla and pakhawaj in well-known volumes. In his Nartan Sarvaswam, which means all about dance, we have detailed records regarding all the dances that took place in Raigad. Raigad gradually became a great center of the arts. And the king, a sensitive artist, also gave special names to certain rhythmic compositions. Although they were of pure rhythmic sound, but he gave them the names of Gajavilas, as if an elephant is walking. Then Dal Badal, gathering clouds, Kadak Bijli, Chamak Bijli, thunder, lightning, and even Navarasa Malika, or the 9 moods. In fact, amongst the princes who patronized Kathak, the greatest are Wajid Ali Shah and Raja Chakradhar Singh. I have spoken about Wajid Ali Shah. 1 or 2 words about what happened to him. In 1856, the British annexed Awadh. They painted a terrible picture about him. But no, at that time Awadh was a flourishing state. But Lord Dalhousie's annexation policy actually harmed the kingdom. Nawab Wajid Ali Shah was brought to Calcutta, more like a prisoner, and given an area in Metia Buruj in the suburbs of Calcutta. There he built up his Choti Lucknow, patronized the arts and dance and music, and that is why Calcutta became exposed to these art forms, and these art forms were so popular in Bengal. So these are the 2 major streams, the temple and the court. The temple with its devotional, serene style, also having dramatic presentations in the enactments of the mythological stories. And then later, the Durbar or the court tradition. Although there were many Hindu rulers who patronized Kathak, but the majority of them were Muslims. And with their influence, Kathak changed in many ways. From the religious, it went to the secular, where emotions of human beings, subtle sensitive portrayals gained importance. And again, a lot of emphasis was given to fast footwork, quicksilver movements, and beautiful abstract presentations. Today, we have inherited both these traditions, and we, in our dance performances, incorporate both. In fact, it is the spirit of acceptance that has made Kathak the rich and grand dance style that we have today. It is one of our major classical dance forms based on the Hindustani classical music tradition, and it has been performed all along North India for many centuries, and then after the Indian independence, it spread throughout India and again to many parts of the world. Thank you.